just before Event Horizon started, I was running a company in Los Angeles, and Richard Jurisic was one of our clients. And when Richard became involved in Event Horizon, he knew me well enough to ask me to come back to London with him to be the visual effects producer. The work that I was doing at that time was very much just in the post-production end of things, and so I saw this as a good opportunity to get involved in a film from start right through to the finish. We went over to Pinewood in August, and the film took almost an entire year to complete from when we started through to when it was released. Richard brought over some other key members of the team from Los Angeles as well, and then we did a lot of local hire for the crew, and we took it from there.
Yeah, there are some specialties involved in the film because we're doing an explosion, explosions that wouldn't be traditional explosions. We have to photograph like many elements, the scale and the scope of the ship. We have a ship that's intended to be a mile long, so you have to always show that in a big, wide master. Well, when you go in to do a close-up and the ship is needed in so many backgrounds and so many pieces, you're talking about how do you scale that down? So we've got a 240th scaled big ship that's 30 feet long. It takes a giant forklift to move it. Our miniatures are really big. We have to put these explosions together in elements. So people. That's not done that often. I mean, it's done an awful lot from where I came from. But so we brought people along that were used to that, so we could just get into it. And the support we've got and the technicians and the artists and the artisans here has been real good. But our explosion, for example, will have like 8 or 9 elements. I hate to talk numbers and elements, but they had to be done in pieces so they could be reduced and then put together. So there's graphics, explosions, real-size miniatures. So that's the unique part. It's the digital services available here also to put it together are necessary.
To begin with, really, there was quite an open brief. Paul had certain sequences in the script that he wanted us to work on storyboarding. Richard brought over a very talented storyboard artist called Brent Boates, who worked very specifically on the visual effects sequences, although Paul would continually steal him to storyboard other sequences in the film. And really between Richard, Paul and Brent Boates, they came up with the main effect sequences, the main shots that were involved. Paul was very good because he actually put a lot of trust in Richard Jurisic to really come up with a lot of the ideas about how things were to be done. Richard's background in visual effects goes all the way back to 2001. And a lot of the people in the effects community, if you get a list of the films that made them want to work in visual effects, Richard has worked on a lot of them, things like Blade Runner, Close Encounter of the Third Kind, a lot of work with Douglas Trumbull on Brainstorm and Silent Running. And to have someone of Richard's caliber as visual effects supervisor on this film was really quite a coup for Paul to pull off. And I think when you pull in someone of Richard's caliber, you give them pretty free rein to come up with cool stuff. So really from that it was Richard and Paul coming up with these amazing ideas for shots, to begin with without much regard as to how they were actually going to be accomplished. And then once that was done, Richard sat down to try and figure out how the shots were going to be made.
Well, you know, the techniques, there are many techniques, and we're really not doing anything that the people before us, all the great guys before us, hadn't done before. There's always a new precedent-setting thing that comes up once in a while, and usually it's an accident. Sometimes you have to design it. But what you really have to do is you take a look at the script and you reconfigure all those old techniques and pieces of equipment to what's needed for the script. Because you could fall into a trap where you take something necessary in the story and reconfigure it to fit a piece of equipment you have. That's the danger, so you have to resist that, you know. What you do is you try to do you have a bundle of money, a certain amount of money. Everybody agrees on it. It's established from before, and you try to get what the director wants and the vision and the needs of the script done for that amount of money.
Most of the scenes required some kind of digital help. In all, there are about 400 or so shots in the film that went through the computer. Some of the work was very straightforward. It was just wire or rig removal. Every screen in the film where there's a bit of animation going on was all put in afterwards. There was no on-set playback. And that in itself was quite a huge volume of shots. And then beyond that, there were the obvious special effects shots, a lot of the spaceship work, which was planned right from the start, a lot of the coolant in Zero Gravity and the other Zero Gravity gags, but in all about 400 shots. Many of those came up just through the post-production process, where Paul would decide he wanted to use a certain shot in a different way, and we had to kind of put that together and deal with it.
In this film, in Event Horizon, there are 6 of the sets, major sets, that will be finished in visual effects, and hopefully there'll be hidden visual effects. You won't notice that the set isn't 150 feet long, it's only 30 feet long, and we're trying to make it 100 feet long.
The hero effects shots on Event Horizon we worked on for almost a full year. We started doing some of the initial pre-visualization and planning work before the main unit photography started, and a lot of the shots that were very complicated were delivered right at the last minute, just a couple of weeks before the film was due out. Generally, the way the process worked is that Richard, Paul and Brent Boates would sit down and do some initial sketches and storyboards. And then what Richard had done was a little bit unusual. He had scale models built out of foam core and erected on one of the stages at Pinewood. And then he and Paul, with a small lipstick camera, actually shot all of the angles that Paul wanted to use and experimented with some camera moves that might end up in the finished film. From a lot of that footage, they then went back and re-storyboarded the sequences and worked out really what angles and what shots they wanted. Separately from that, Richard then went away to figure out how feasible it was to achieve many of those shots, what size the models would have to be, how big a stage we needed to erect a lot of the final models on, and what type of motion control equipment we would require to capture the elements that would then be put together in post. The model elements themselves were shot in parallel with the main unit photography, so that Paul was able to review what was being done in the shots at the same time that he was filming with the actors. We turned over a lot of the model elements to the visual effects facilities in order that they could actually start work on some of the more complicated shots while we were still filming. And that worked very well. The 2 main facilities that were involved in London were CineSight and Computer Film Company. CineSight were involved in putting together a lot of the spaceship shots and a lot of the zero gravity gags, whereas Computer Film Company were involved in doing all of the screen inserts and all of the shots where the coolant is seen floating in the air. We swapped a lot of the shots around from the 2 facilities, really depending on how big their workload was in terms of putting the shots together. Paul, of course, in his own inimitable fashion, did manage to throw us a couple of curveballs and come up with some shots spontaneously that we had to respond to. But that's generally taken as being part of the creative process, and I think makes the film a lot better.
Well, Paul's really into visual effects, and he understands just about everything they do on the stage. If he's a young man, and if he hasn't seen it before, he learns it first. He knows it before anybody, which is quite good, and really good for us, because I was joking when I said the hardest part, or what's been most difficult, is keeping up with Paul. That, of course, is all directors want as much as they can, and Paul does. If they didn't, they wouldn't be worth too much. But the fact that he's so knowledgeable about doing this and so interested in visuals does give us the time. But don't have to be on the stage at all times to check a plate. I can leave with confidence and know that the plate's going to be okay. Doesn't happen too often.
Overall, there were about 400 effects shots that we worked on digitally. Of those, probably about half of them were pretty straightforward. All of the screens where you see animation or live action happening were all put in after the event. On set, they were just put in with green screen, and then afterwards Computer Film Company tracked and then laid in graphics which were supplied by AMX Digital, who also designed all of the transparencies where they were putting into screens but they weren't actually moving.